Welcome to the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may have missed, with your hosts AJ Kuti and Jason Gordon. Hey everybody, welcome back to the show. We are the Reschool'd podcast, the show that discusses all the things that schools may not have prepared you for. As always, I am AJ, and sitting across from me, Jason. Jason, how are you doing today?
I'm tired, AJ.
You're tired?
It was a long weekend. Yeah, it was a long weekend, MLK Jr. Holiday weekend, and it was just busy. I worked the entire time, yard work, housework, everything. So now I need to get back to doing my job for a break.
Yeah.
What about you? What'd you do this weekend?
We went up to, it was our first residency of the program for the semester. So we went up there, met our new professors, figured out what we were going to have to do for the rest of the semester. And I actually met with my committee for my dissertation. So I was telling my wife, Monday, my time clock for my dissertation officially started. So that's a bit of a stressful time, but I'll get
we need
it
to
together.
Do an episode on what is a PhD or a doctorate degree.
Oh, that'd be a good one, yeah.
What does it entail and stuff like that? Because, I don't have I have a law degree, right? I don't have a traditional doctorate degree. I've just been teaching all these years. The folks like yourself that are going through the program, people who are considering that, we need to talk about it. Let them know what it's about.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I see a lot of misunderstanding about it. I can tell you that much.
Yeah, and even within the program. But no, that'd be a great idea. We need to do that one. I'll put that one on the dock, so we can go ahead and do that one.
Yeah, well, get another guest in here that knows a little something about it, and then you two can educate me because I'm a little in the dark by comparison.
Shoot, yeah. Well, today's episode came from your ideating. I know that's a word. It's in there. I'll find it eventually. Your ideation of how education changed over the years. You'd mentioned something about it last episode, and you said, that would probably be a good one, and so we decided let's go ahead and do it. So how does that sound to you?
Perfect. Well, before we jump in, though, got to remind everybody, please check us out on the website, reschool'd.com. That's Reschool'd with a D, not an ED. And, of course, social media profiles and your favorite podcasting app. Got to give us all those stars, all those likes, share it with other people. Keep the comments coming in so we know what you want to hear about, so we know what to talk about. Okay, so we're here for you. Take advantage of it. There you go.
Absolutely. Well, today's quick question, and it's a pretty straightforward one, and I would imagine, I put it more specific. I wanted to ask it more specific because obviously the title of this episode is how education has changed over the years. So it has changed over the years, but from a more of a short term, I guess mid to short term, do you think education, particularly in college, has changed significantly since you were an undergrad?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I'm 41 years old. I graduated undergraduate, I guess, 19 years ago now. So just over that 20-ish year period, I've seen a lot change. Coming into college, I was coming in with a blank slate. My brother and I were the first members of our family, our immediate family, to go to college. So we didn't have a lot of background or understanding. Getting indoctrinated at the time of going, understanding what it meant and things like that. There was a lot of things I didn't understand about it. But I would say during that time, school was even more caught up in the historical role of college versus what college is turning into. And what I see now, because you and I both are professors, and I see a lot of students the same way. They're getting introduced to college, and their perception of college, the academic institution's approach to what is education in the post-high school environment, the undergraduate environment, I see it changing. It changes all the time. And, the difference between the generations, because lots of times, your employers or the people out there already in the workforce, I guess like ourselves, right? We're closer to 40 years old than we are 20 years old. So
sadly,
when we look back and say, all right, this was our experience. This is what you expect from college and things like that. And when you're hiring people, your perception of what their educational experience was is different from what they actually went through, right? So, it's creating this whole thing out there in society. And that's why I think it's so valuable to talk about, right? I mean, you've probably, how many years have you been teaching now?
I think I'm coming up on 11 or 12. I can't remember. I think it's maybe 12.
even over that decade, how much change have you seen?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot of change.
Yeah.
There's no question there's change, and I've seen it all the way from. I mean, I grew up in a college class because my dad was a professor, and he would take me to classes. Like it would just like if I did need to go. Now you couldn't even do that today. Like you can't. If I couldn't take my son or my daughter to class if I needed to keep them.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to go with them, and it was kind of a even back then it was like the class was more of a almost more family friendly. Maybe that's
Mm-hmm.
a bad word, but it was more like it was collegial more so back then than it was now because I would even at 7 years old, the students in the class enjoyed having me there. Like it was,
Mm-hmm.
there was a camaraderie even with a 7 year old because it was a professor's kid, and they could joke around, and my dad was joking around, and you can't do that anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Like you can't do that.
You know,
They frown upon that.
do you think it would be helpful if we back out a long time back, give a little history for anybody out there listening on the history of education and how it came about in the U.S. and that kind of thing, and then kind of say, okay, well, this is what we went through,
Yeah,
20 years ago. This is what it's like, but this is what we've seen over the past 10, 15 years. We can honestly say over the past 20 years because throughout that entire time, we've pretty well been in school that entire
yeah, oh yeah,
time. We've either
absolutely.
been teaching or we were in school,
Yep,
one of the two. So,
yep.
so let's jump in then historically, right?
Okay.
Oldest colleges in the United States, right? Which ones are they? Quiz for you.
I know UGA is the oldest chartered university.
So that's a state chartered
Yep,
thing.
state
But
chartered
the
thing.
oldest ones are the private ones.
Yeah, the Ivy Leagues.
Ivy
Was it
Leagues, and there's
Harvard,
these few. So
Yale?
Harvard's one of the oldest, right? Yale, Princeton,
Yeah,
Brown,
mhm.
Dartmouth, Cornell. So Columbia. Wait, is Columbia in the?
I don't know.
I should know. I should know that, but you know,
I'll vet it for you. Hold on.
yeah, you can bet that one for me. But anyway, these colleges that were the oldest private academic institutions, right, were the first that formed. They kind of set the standard for what education was going to be in the U.S. The European model was a little different, right? Everybody goes out, they finish up what the equivalent of high school is, maybe through 10th or 11th grade, whatever, 15, 16 years old, they finish up. And then they took a internship. I call it an internship. You could call it anything. It's basically where you're studying under somebody else's tutelage, and you would learn throughout that period and then try to get your licensure if that was required, right? If you were going to be a doctor, you were going to be a licensed professional like a lawyer, you would learn that by practicing along with somebody under their tutelage, and then you would sit for your exams and things like that. And once you got your certification, you'd oftentimes go out and start your own practice and things like that, right? So anyway, it was just somewhat of a different model. Education was very career oriented, that type of thing. Come over to the new world, right? These colleges like Harvard are started on the premise of a well-rounded exposure to education. So we adopt the liberal arts model. We didn't even have majors and things like that. It was just a general, well-rounded education that was supposed to allow you to think at a higher level. Because, in other episodes, we've talked extensively about exposure and the effect that it has on you, right?
Yep.
And so that was kind of the model that they adopted, right? And well-rounded exposure, language, science, arts, history, philosophies, things like that. And then that higher level of thinking would translate into any career. And honestly, it did, right? It did set people apart in their ability, particularly to work their way up and to manage other people and to work their way up to the tops of organizations or even to start organizations, right? With these principles in mind. Over the years, these individuals have more success in the work environment, and society turns towards higher education as being the remedy for preparing people for an ever-changing world. Back 75 years ago, 10, 15% of the population at most got the opportunity to go to college, right? The graduating population. Now it's way higher, right?
Yeah.
4 or 5 times as many people are able to go to college. You have so many schools, you have things like that. But we've kind of kept that liberal arts background this entire time, right? This idea that college is a place of higher level thought and things like that. And the people who staff it are professors who are researchers and know the cutting edge topics to talk about in terms of your theoretical underpinnings of whatever you're studying, right? But I would dare say much of that has changed. Am I right?
Yeah, it is.
And
No
do
question.
you see the professor as just being this robed erudite that walks around the classroom and just has this deep philosophical understanding of whatever they're talking about?
Not even a little.
Is that the way you see yourself in accounting, AJ?
No, not even a little. I don't philosophize on accounting.
Yeah, you don't wear the robe, put on a wig, stand in front of a chalkboard and pontificate and just allow people to absorb your brilliance as it flows from your mouth.
I would have one student in class, and that's probably somebody I'd pay to just sit there.
Yeah, so needless to say, colleges went away from that. One, there's so many more academic institutions, so many more people go to college. What I would say is this: college has turned into more similar to high school. It's very similar to what you'd see if you just continued on through the 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th grade.
Sometimes 17th and 18th.
Yeah. Lots of people go to college for 6 years.
8 years. They're called doctors.
So that model is changing, right? It really is an idea that, okay, once you finish high school, you spend another year or two going over general topics that largely you took in high school. And I would say this: lots of students are exposed to topics like English, like history in college. Those topics were already taught in high school, and they might have been more challenging in high school depending on the level of high school you went to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very true.
And the level of college you went to, right? Depending on the academic rigor. But I would say this: there's been this huge shift as well away from college just being this place that was just full of academic rigor, right? Where you had to put yourself wholly in it and were just invested in the acquisition of knowledge and understanding to, I just need to prove that I've been exposed to these things adequately to get, a grade that whatever is prescribed is passing. And the more people you put into the system, the lower the standard is for passing, right? And so it's kind of shifted away from this demonstration, right, this defense of your acquired knowledge about a topic to, okay, just make sure you're exposed to it, make sure you can do the basic principles and all of these topics, and that's going to be some signaling function to employers. I mean, employers now look at the college degree very similar to the way they looked at the high school degree 70 years ago.
Yeah.
That's the qualifying factor, right? That level of exposure is what means, you are qualified for this position, that you will be a good candidate for this position. So employers are part of the driving force behind that, right? Governments obviously want to improve the economic situation. They push people towards college and say, this is going to help in some way, whether it's a technical school, whether it's a 4-year academic institution, whatever. And they're not wrong, right? There are benefits there, but employers are driving the same thing. They want to hire qualified, knowledgeable employees. So they've put this additional requirement on top of it, that is that you've gone through this experience, right? Which is very interesting, right? Because lots of times the employers are expecting something different than they're getting from the college student, right? They're expecting a level of skill acquisition, where historically it was, no, you'll learn whatever it is on the job. Where now employers are like, well, you should already know about marketing and you should already know about accounting. You should be able to step in and do these things as soon as you get here. And honestly, because of that, I think the academic environment is changing a lot, which brings us all the way up to the present, right? With students, so the academic environment's changing, but also students themselves, their perception of what they can expect, but also, right, how they perform, what they do in the classroom has changed. Over the last 20 years, we've seen it. So there you go. That's the background. That's what we are talking about today. How has education changed from the institutional perspective and a student perspective.
Really quickly to fall back, I was vetting this. So Harvard is the oldest. Columbia is number 10. So it is in that category. Columbia is number 10. It was a 1754.
Okay.
So the top 10 are Harvard, College of William and Mary, St. John's, Yale, University of Pennsylvania, another college that I'm not really sure how to say. I probably mess it up, so I'm not going to. It's in Pennsylvania as well. University of Delaware, Princeton, and then Washington and Lee University, and then finally Columbia. So, how much do you think? Like you're talking about all these changes, and it was more like the theory and the philosophy, and then you learn the practical stuff on the job, and now it's like you're learning skills. And how much has research affected this? Because colleges their focus is research. I mean, majority of the colleges in the U.S., the sole focus is almost research. And as you research, you learn new things, and you learn about trends, and you learn about the generalization about a certain group. And as you progress, and as we progress through time, you start researching more and more, and you start building on the past research and all this kind of stuff. That's naturally going to have an inherent effect on the way we see things and the way we look at like teaching and going, okay, well, this method based on the study that I've seen over here is not working. So we're going to need to change some things. Or this idea that we have for this generation is not the same for the upcoming generation. So we're going to need to change things. How much do you think research has had the impact on changing schools to that 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th on grades?
So that's interesting. So you know the concept of academic freedom in the classroom, right? Giving the professor the leeway to teach along their understanding of the topic, because technically they're the experts, not the administrators of the school. Well, with this whole shift, right, professors, by and large, historically have been researchers. They expand the field of knowledge, and there's still room for that at your biggest universities that are research-based universities. We call them R1s. If you ever hear that, they're talking about a research university, right? Mm-hmm. And all of your bigger, more well-known universities mostly are R1 researching universities. But what I've seen over the past, 20 years is you're increasingly having this class of professor that are researchers. They don't teach many classes. They write textbooks. They do research articles that get included in and are cited in textbooks, and they move the theory and understanding of the field in that way. But the people who are teaching more of the classes are either adjuncts or lecturers or professors in the practice. And these are individuals that oftentimes come from industry, and they're hired as professors. They don't receive the level of esteem and respect, and certainly not the pay associated with an accomplished researcher. But they have, roots very firmly planted in industry practice, and they're teaching from these textbooks, from these case studies, from these things written by the researchers rather than the industry practitioners. So a lot of what students are getting in the classroom is coming from just by virtue of how universities segment it out. Now, universities will never get away from that model of having, at least research universities will have to have a heavy body of researchers. And you're always going to have your best and brightest students going to these big research universities rather than teaching universities, simply because recognition among employers, right? These larger universities have the money to hire these researchers. They have a separate class. The number one ranking factor for a university is the opinion of that university of the existing academic community. So basically, professors rank universities, and that's what comes up in the ranking so high. Employers take that as the gospel and do their recruiting at these bigger, more well-renowned universities, and the whole thing is cyclical. Now more students want to go to these universities because they're ranked higher. They have larger endowments, right? Because historically they're the oldest as well, and more employers recruit there. So once again, the reputation and the cycle and the business behind it, the making money behind it, continues in a very circular fashion, right? But you have all sorts of universities that are popping up in the last 50 years that become very specialized, that are very focused, that are not research-based in that way. They're more skill-based, right? And they're focused very heavily. So you're seeing, if nothing else, in the institution, you're seeing this dichotomy. You have these researching class faculty that do, this thing, this purpose in society, but you get these hybrid blended schools like your school, right? That has so many people that want that are researchers in a way, but they don't do that much research, right? And really nothing they publish is really moving the ball of understanding forward that much. Mainly they're teachers. But it begs the question, why are they required to have a PhD? Why are you required to have a PhD as a researcher if you're not going to be doing a ton of that? Your primary focus is going to be on teaching, which would mean more industry focus, right? Type scenario. I don't know. So that's kind of what I see institutionally where we are there. What's your opinion on that? Where we're going and how they're trying to balance that researcher versus skill-based practitioner as teacher?
I mean, I think we're going down a wormhole, honestly, because when you talk about research from a professor standpoint, I mean that's what they're getting graded on. It's not about the teaching; it's about the research. And so when your sole focus is, I mean, you're talking, okay, so, the vast majority of the universities in the U.S., they offer tenure. Well, in order to get tenure, you have to have publish. And it's a higher level of publication, quantity or quality, or both, that has to happen within the first 5 years of your employment. Otherwise, they have this thing that's called up or out. You go up for it. If you don't get tenure, then you're out. And so the sole focus within the first 5 years is research and very, very little on teaching. And then you get tenure, and then it takes an act of Congress to get you fired. And so you can slack off too. I mean, I've had that in my classes as well. And so in doctoral programs, almost the sole focus on doctoral programs is research. It has nothing to do with teaching. The program that I'm in, we have a class that is dedicated specifically about teaching. It's a pedagogy class, and it's rare to have something like that in a lot of cases. So, when you're dealing with research, you put so much focus on research, and then the research gives you output. It gives you the results, and then you start reading that, and from higher, like you're saying, the faculty are the ones that rank the colleges. So it's the same thing. The academics are the one that ranks the studies. And if those studies become, I will say, if the studies become academically viral, we have viral memes that go gangbusters on the internet. I mean, you have this kind of the same thing when it comes to academic research. I mean, you have these papers that just become huge and they're cited for everything. And when you have something like that, which is really dependent on other academics, that has nothing, and most people in the public won't be reading these papers, then you start to believe that those are the gospel of whatever they've studied and nothing's wrong with them. You tend not to critique them. And so you just take them at face value.
And it becomes very circular, right? Without these researchers, all of a sudden the rankings go down based upon how it's done now or how it's perceived now. If the rankings go down, then students, so your best and brightest students, or at least the parents of the best and brightest students, right? And when I say the best and brightest students, they may not be the smartest humans in the world, but they are indoctrinated in how to study, how to learn. They have a background in education, and they're the ones who are the valedictorians and salutatorians, and they're the ones who go to Harvard because they made a 1600 on the SAT and they have all this potential and blah, blah, blah. But they go there, and the quality of the institution and the quality of the output rises so exponentially because they want to go to the place that's got the best and brightest. But in terms of researcher, though, it's not necessarily the best and brightest in terms of who's actually teaching the classes, because those researchers are not teaching the classes. But we do know that the professor only has a small effect, right? It's more the person you're sitting beside in the classroom. So it's this self-reinforcing cycle. if you put all the best students together in the classroom, that classroom, what they cover, how much theory is introduced, and how deeply they learn something will be exponentially higher than if you put lower level students with the best teacher in the world in the classroom, right? It's just by virtue of hours of exposure and the way assignments and the requirement that you work on assignments outside of class and things. So it's this self-reinforcing cycle that, the actual institutions themselves are in this conundrum. Now, there are certainly institutions out there who are breaking the mold. Don't get me wrong. You'll find them in every city, particularly specialty colleges, engineering, design, things like that are just breaking the mold completely, right? They're just teaching their thing and they're doing it well. And they may not be researching universities, right? They may focus on industry preparation. Certainly the whole technical college scenario, rather than your traditional four-year academic institution, they've fallen into that model of just preparing people for jobs, careers, and work. And it's been very successful for people, but there's this perception, there's this negative perception out there that if you're going to a technical college, that somehow you're doing less, or going to something easier or less prominent than a four-year academic institution. And in my personal opinion, that's certainly not true for most four-year academic institutions. As a matter of fact, you could be learning a lot more and get a better experience and education from a technical institution than your traditional four-year academic institution. So, I don't know. But with that, the students' expectations are changing, right? I
Yes.
think, at least I've seen with students, they tend to want more of the practical subject matter in classes rather than the theory, rather than they don't really want to take English history and things like that again unless they're focusing on it, right? Because they've taken those courses in high school. They want to get into what they want to learn about. And I think colleges are starting to accommodate that more. At least some very successful ones are. I don't know.
Yeah.
What's your opinion? What are some of the major changes based upon this whole cycle we've identified here, right? This conundrum of research versus teaching. What have you seen changing within colleges, and what have you seen changing with regard to expectation of students?
Well, I think majority of it stems from the generations changing.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, funny enough, we just had an assignment that we had to do. We had to read, different articles and stuff. And one of the articles was talking about how generations are different. And then upcoming freshmen this academic year, they were born in 2004 or 2004. I mean, that's significantly different than when we were born. And they have different traits. They grew up in a different way. They have different traits. They have different things that they use to motivate them. They have different skills that they've learned. And one of the things with this, it's a combination of the generation, but it's also a combination of the maturity level too. So, I mean, you're talking, 18, you're not at the height of your maturity by any stretch of the imagination. I remember those days. But, you struggle with the ability to motivate, to self-motivate. Time management is something that you haven't really learned yet. And these are all things that, if you're an older generation where, for you, you grew up on a farm. I mean, you grew up having to do a lot of manual chores, I would imagine. That time management skills was kind of instilled in you at an early age, because that's just kind of the generation that we, you and I, to a certain degree, were brought up in. However, this generation, I mean, everything is on your phone. I mean, you can put anything you want on your phone, and you didn't have to worry about. There's apps for it. I mean, there's an app for it. I can tell you right now. Like, do you remember the day when you were back in? And I don't know if this was for you, but back in the day when you had friends and you want to contact them, you actually had to remember their phone number, and you had to call the landline. I can tell you right now, my son probably doesn't know. He knows his phone number simply because that's who he gives it out. But I guarantee he probably wouldn't know mine or my wife's because, it's on his phone. So
Uh-huh.
the need to remember things, the need to have time management skills, the need to be self motivated, these are all things that were different for us. And so I do think the generations, they're different, and within that, it is important for professors to understand what can be used to drive class to success, to motivate students to get things done. It's not anymore where, back in the day it was okay when you give a group project to say, here's the group project, and I want the output, whatever the output is, I want it to be due by this day at the end of the semester. Now it's more of, you have individual outputs, individual things that say, okay, I want this done by this date, this done by this date, this done by this date, and it helps because they have that quick need. That's just one of the examples. There's a ton of things that I think go into why it's changed from both sides. The professor side, the student's side, the employer, more than one side, the employer side, just society in general. It used to be college was that thing where, like, people who go to college, they actively chose to go to college. And now for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
students, it's not really a choice. I mean, the parents are the ones that saying, you're going to go to college. And I
Or
think
society's
that's,
pushing them,
yeah,
right?
absolutely. And I think that's an issue. So, there's so many factors that goes into this. Now, my question back to you is, with all these things that have changed or are changing, do you think these changes are good things or bad things?
Well, some universities are doing it right. Some universities are not keeping up with the times and they're suffering. Right or wrong, higher education still serves the public at large. And if the sentiment of the public at large changes about what is expected of higher education, and when I say the public at large, it's not just students, right? It's the industry. Do industries, do employers, do people who contribute, did they expect something different of higher educational institutions? If they do, then the university system will have to change to meet that expectation. And, for your top universities, that this whole cycle that they're on works. They have large endowments, they have brand name, and that's probably their most valuable asset, their brand recognition. Students will continue to go there because of that, and wherever students go that are diligent, dedicated, work hard, and have shown that potential over time, employers will continue to recruit there. It's all the other universities that are bringing in students who cannot depend upon brand or recognition of the university to move them forward. They're going to have to depend on a combination of skill and the signaling function of the degree to employers and all of the secondary opportunities that the college university can offer them, right? The recruiting functions, the networking training, the professionalism training, and yes, a lot of the skill based things that says you get out of here. And yes, you might have the most directed, most targeted degree ever. Well, that is going to help qualify you for specific jobs over others who have a more general degree, where that has not been the traditional higher education model. Employers are starting to expect it. Students are starting to desire that to avoid a lot of other things and to focus in on what they want to do. And a lot of educational institutions are focusing on that. So you're already getting this niche carved out of a large antiquated system, right? So I'd say on the extremes, the new cutting edge universities that are just there to meet what industry needs and what students want, they're going to do fine, I believe. And then your old established historical, your old private colleges like we talked about, your flagship universities within any state, like in Georgia, University of Georgia and Georgia Tech, right? These are both research universities, but they're your flagship university. And regardless, students are going to go there. They'll go through that older traditional model, and they're going to get opportunities out of it. So that's not going anywhere. But what happens to the regional school, right? What happens to the many, many other smaller state run or private schools that are struggling to find their identity, largely because there's this expectation about what an academic institution is from this old model, And there's this expectation of students now that I'm going there for a specific learning experience and to be prepared for industry. Can these can this group of universities meet this expectation of students and employers? And I don't know.
Yeah.
You see a lot of them struggling. I don't know. The whole online scenario has changed a lot,
Yeah, that's a
right?
big one.
All of a sudden, yeah, they're not going to be able to invest to the same extent in these fixed resources like buildings, right? Like open space, like student dorms and things like that, because online is changing everything, right? This old model of come in a classroom and show me that you're learning and understanding or write reports. Well, AI is coming along so quickly that, right, writing reports and things like that. So school is going to have to shift to more of a exposure model. Can we expose you to specific things rather than just try to make you regurgitate some level of memorization and things like that at the time? I do want students to get what they need and what society hopes for them out of the educational process. But institutions are going to have to learn to adapt to this as well. Employers are going to have to manage their expectations and come to an understanding of what education is and what it serves now. Because, as you know, there's usually 10, 15, 20-year difference between the individual who's hiring the student, right, to
Hmm.
enter the career. And if industry does not understand this evolution in what schools are and how they're preparing students, and honestly, they don't do better to understand what students want out of the employment environment and how ready they are to come into that environment coming out of academic institutions, things are going to get discombobulated. That's all it is to it. So anyway, the answer is I don't know. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but I know there has to be a constant evolution there. Otherwise, things will continue to get stagnant. But yes, on the fringes, is Harvard always going to be Harvard? Yes,
Yeah.
right. Are there going to be new cutting edge schools popping up that are extraordinarily successful, particularly in careers in industry? Yes. But honestly, academic institutions like the one you're at, they're the ones who are going to have to find their identity, um, at least in my opinion. And as a disclaimer, I taught at your at your academic.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You may not be able to say these things, but I taught at your academic institution for 10 years,
Yep.
and they're caught up in the heart of this overall struggle we're talking about
Yep.
that all academic institutions are facing.
Yep. Uh, if a student, and this will be our last question too, but if a student is listening to this podcast and they are seeing some of these changes that we're talking about to be particularly bad, is there anything that the students can do to help the situation for them? I mean, they're not going to
Manage
change
their expect.
I was going to say they're not going to change the paradigm of where academics are right now, but is there anything that they can do for themselves to manage to make it better?
Well, I would just say manage their expectations. The better you understand the way the system is, the better you are able to position yourself to get out of the experience what you want. You can take the right classes, you can go to the right university, you can enter career fields the appropriate way. And everything comes down to understanding, right? No path is perfectly paved for you, right? You're going to have to walk around along rocky terrain, and you're going to have to go around mountains and hills that you didn't want to have to go around. Hopefully, it will make the student a better person. Hopefully, it will make them a better professional as well. And ultimately, yeah, manage expectations. There you go. You'll get out of it what you want to get out of it.
Sure. And I would piggyback on that. I mean, it's understanding what your goal is, what your why is, and then being able to sacrifice what's necessary to get what you need. You know, that's to me, that's probably one of the biggest things is if you want something, go for it. It's not going to be easy. Figure out what that is and push yourself. You know, drive yourself. Find that self motivation. Find those time management skills. That's the kind of things that will make college better for you because again, college does not it's not going to give you 100% everything you need. There's some things that you're going to have to fill in the gap for or with. And so it's going to take, you doing some work on your own to figure those things out. So that would be my way of helping the situation. That's been a good episode.
This was a deeper episode. Probably
very
anybody who's
philosophical.
listening to it probably didn't know what they're going to get out of it. But
no kidding. Well, you have any?
Hopefully, there was some value taken there.
Yeah, you have any parting words before we head out?
Yeah, just remind everybody, check us out on the website. That's going to be the best place to get in contact with us. Send us those messages. Let us know what you're thinking about. And then, of course, your favorite podcasting app continues to boost us up on there. Give us the likes, give us the shares, that type of thing. And we appreciate it.
Awesome. Well, we hope you enjoyed the episode. We hope to see you next time. Until then, goodbye.
Take care.
Thanks for listening to the Reschool'd podcast. Be sure to head over to reschool'd.com for news and other information on things we're getting into.